Hi, I'm Sebastian Couture, and you're listening to Epicenter, the podcast where we interview crypto founders, builders, and thought leaders. Today, we have a real treat for you. We have a conversation with Vitalik Buterin. Sunny and I sat down with Vitalik after ETHCC in the ETHCC studio, and we talked for about an hour, mostly about the contents of his talk. So he gave a really inspiring talk during the conference where he expressed his desire for the community to build products that go beyond DeFi, to build products that go beyond things that are financial in nature. And I think this is something that he's been really passionate about for some time now, but he really expressed it clearly during this keynote presentation. And one of the things that he expressed is his desire for new forms of social media platforms to emerge in the DeFi space, and the convergence of scalable layer 2 technologies and NFTs. I think can really make that possible because we now have the technologies to build scalable social media platforms that can attract non-crypto users or new types of users to the space. He also discussed another area that he's really into, which is retroactive public good funding and being able to fund things after the fact and sort of flipping the funding model around. And generally, we just talked about where his head's at currently, with the pandemic and how that may have sort of shifted his areas of focus. So it was a really fun conversation. It was really kind of like lightweight and just like informal and really cool. So after we finished the interview, Sunny and I both looked at each other and said, this was one of our favorite interviews in a long time, and I think you'll enjoy it as well. If you're listening to this on the audio version of the show, there's also a full-length video of this conversation. It's on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, so check that out as well. Before we go to the interview, though, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor this week. DEXs are great, but they're vulnerable to problems like MEV, failed transactions, and high gas costs. CowSwap tackles these issues head-on and offers a new kind of trading experience. It's built by Gnosis, and CowSwap is a meta-DEX aggregator. That's right, it's a DEX aggregator. It fights MEV by matching overlapping orders directly. And if no coincidence of wants is found, that's where the cow comes from, coincidence of wants, trades are settled on a variety of underlying on-chain AMMs, depending on which pool offers the best price. So give CowSwap a try and enjoy perks like no gas fees on failed transactions, optimized transaction management for multisig and DAOs, as well as some other fun and entertaining surprises. So head over to cowswap.exchange and start swapping today. So without further delay, here is our conversation with Vitalik Buterin. We're here with Vitalik Buterin. I'm here with my co-host, Sunny Agrawal. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's been a really long time since you've been on Epicenter, so I think a lot of people have been waiting for this. So how have you been since the beginning of the pandemic? How's the pandemic been treating you?
For a big part of it, I guess I was just holed up in Singapore, just having less human context than I had in, I guess, any of the 6 or 7 years previously. So that was interesting, just focused on some virtual things, also doing a lot of walking and running and just reading and continuing to do all the Ethereum related various things, of course.
I guess in the past year, just like last year has been so emblematic, I suppose. Has your sort of focus changed as a result of the pandemic? Has the pandemic sort of awakened things like interests and things that perhaps how has things changed in the last year for you with regards to Ethereum?
It's a challenging question because at the same time as the pandemic, a lot of things have changed. A lot of things about the world have changed. A lot of things about the crypto world have also changed at the same time. I think the most important thing about the crypto world that's changed in the last year and a half is just how big it's gotten, right? And obviously, you can see on the numbers, the price bumps and all of those things, but that's a sign of a bigger thing. And there's other signs too, right? There's all sorts of just mainstream figures talking about it. Like even just one example is that tweet or that blog post from myself and Jing and Optimism on our attractive public goods funding. Like Dominic Cummings, one of the top, I think, Brexit people, retweeted that. So that was, obviously, there's all the celebrities focusing on crypto, and Elon Musk like fumbling around the space in his own very special way, and like there's just like large percentages of the population in general like actually have heard of cryptocurrency at this point, and like this is both good and bad, right? It's good because crypto is not going to slide into irrelevance, but it's also a time when we have to think carefully about responsibility, because we know for the last 10 years of the space have basically been able to hide behind the excuse that, hey, this is experimental technology, and I know that like to most people this seems kind of useless except for some prices going up, but it's really when the technology gets better, this is really going to go places. And now like it's the technology is close to ready, right? The scaling solutions, lots of them are coming out this year. Some of them are coming out next year. The ecosystem is maturing in all sorts of ways. Like, proof of stake actually is happening. All of a whole bunch of technologies that we've said are happening for a long time actually are happening. And there's just a lot of eyes on the space. And so 5 years from now, we're not going to be able to get away with saying this is just an experiment. So, like, people are going to need some kind of results from the crypto space. And the question of like exactly how much value and like what kind of value we can actually provide for people, that's it's something that I think has been on people's minds since the beginning, but I think it just has to be on people's minds in a much more serious way, right? And I think like so far there is definitely value that has been provided, right? Like, but so far it's mostly been financial. And like, there's a lot of financial value that doesn't get recognized, like even just a whole bunch of random people in various countries around the world that just like quietly use it as a way to, send money back to their families or just make international transactions for businesses and all of these things. But like, the kinds of hopes that people have on the crypto space, at least from what I've seen, like go even further than that, right? Like even like Tyler Cohen, one of the GMU economists, I think has even like called, was it like myself and Balaji, like the two most interesting like libertarians or something like this. So
what do you think about his whole like state libertarianism?
State capacity libertarianism? I mean, it's definitely one of those kind of interesting synthesis perspectives, I guess. Like I see the philosophy, and like I see lots of correct things about the philosophy, which is basically that like surgical, high quality, smart government action happening earlier can be a substitute for problems that end up creating a trade-off between, or end up leading to otherwise much more ham-fisted government regulation later. Like even just COVID vaccines were an excellent example of this, right? Like if governments had just gotten off their butts, realized the enormity of the problem, and just properly like told Pfizer and Moderna, hey guys, if you guys figure this out, we're literally going to give you $100 billion prize. Like lots of people would yell and scream at this, but in my opinion, like the world would have been so much better had that happened, right? And like the problem would have been solved in, like 6 months instead of 18 potentially. So, and I mean, obviously on top of that, also do the work of like clearing off the red tape and all of that. But like that requires a actually like skilled response. Mm-hmm. And so that's the good side of, I guess, some of that perspective. And the interesting thing actually is that I think there's parallels between that perspective and things that the crypto space is doing, because like the crypto space has these kind of constructs that sometimes get analogized to being kind of like nation states, but also kind of not like nation states. Mm-hmm. And they have these foundations that are kind of like governments, but they're also not like governments, right? Like they have a pool of funds that they can use to fund public goods, but they do not have the ability to like enforce and change rules in the blockchain. They can only propose things, and then people may or may not accept them.
If you treat these like foundations as sort of these like public entities, right. Do you think that there's like currently in the space there's a lack of accountability or just like voice that the people of the communities have over their governments or these foundations?
I think the challenge is that in the crypto space, we don't really know how to define or quantify membership, right? Like once you start talking about voice, then the question is who deserves to have that voice? And clearly the answer is not like everyone in the world to an equal extent, right? But then what is the answer? And it's a question that actually does have a lot of meaning, right? Because if you go back to, say, the DAO fork, and you remember some of the arguments around the DAO fork, right? Like one of the comments that I remember being made at the time was that people who were in favor of the DAO fork were arguing that people who were against the DAO fork at the beginning and then people who were in favor of VTC later on were just like shills coming in from the Bitcoin side, basically trying to either impose their foreign values on the Ethereum community, or worse, just like stir trouble and create chaos in the Ethereum community because that's good for Bitcoin. Now, my opinion is that like those kinds of perspectives tends to be overblown, and people tends to underappreciate that like even people within their own community tends to like don't align exactly on values to the extent that they think they do, but. Like even still, it would have been interesting if we had like a clearer way to know the answer, right? And like so far, the ways that we have of defining community membership, they're not very good. Like what is there? Like there's coin holdings, but like in my opinion, coin holdings are an extremely imperfect proxy, right? Like for example, if you compare, I don't know, the number of coins, let's say like Joe Lubin has to the number of coins that, like say, Tim Bako has, right? Like that's, it's going to end up being pretty lopsided, right? But that's, like let's say that, I don't know what the difference is, but I'm going to guess somewhere between a factor of 100 and 1,000, could be wrong in either direction. But that does not mean that Joe Lubin is like, 100 to 1,000 times more of importance to Ethereum than Tim Bako is. Like Tim does a lot of important core dev coordination work, and so like money is a very imperfect proxy. But then what are the better proxies? And like there are things like, for example, in the Zcash Foundation, there's like this community advisory council, and like you're either a part of it or you're not, and it's somewhat more of a kind of, I guess, technocratic design. There's obviously just foundations themselves that have kind of even more closed membership. So I think systems. Yeah, exactly. Like I think my answer to this is that like I don't think there is a perfect solution, but I do think we need more thinking, more ideas, and more work on like better approaches. Like I think if we can just figure out like what is a sensible concept of membership, so we can figure out like what is like if we want and like who are we even trying to give representation to, then we've at least made the first step toward like figuring out what the actual problem is, right? And then like potentially governance is going to become easier, and like potentially there's a possibility that like it'll actually be kind of more responsive to the community's actual values, and going back to kind of state capacity libertarianism, like even by being more competent at the same time be more respectful of the fundamental guarantees that the community wants to preserve.
What are some of the most interesting like experiments that you're seeing right now in crypto of like new ways of defining membership?
So aside from coins, I mean, what is there? Like there's just like, I guess, the 0 to 1 function where you get 1 if you put in the tiniest amount of effort, right? Like proof of humanity is one example. Like I think if you do Ethereum governance by proof of humanity vote, like it's not going to be great, but it's actually not going to be terrible either. Like you are still selecting for people who care at least a little bit about Ethereum. Now, in the long term, I mean, once like eventually you are going to get like hostile blockchain communities that start like registering identities and brigading. But for now, it's already an improvement.
We actually had this in the Cosmos Hub launch. Like there was like the game of stakes thing, and we use like passports to like do it, and it one validator actually just like basically got like a bunch of their community members to like submit passports, and they just civil attacked the game of stakes just to like show off that they could, but like
right. Yeah, it's also like philosophically interesting what the dividing line is between just a successful political campaign and a civil attack. Gitcoin Grants has had a lot of like deep philosophical debates about this as well, which is also fascinating. So there's that. And if you want to get more granular, there's like Pope tokens, right? And with Pope tokens, you can have one, but you can get 5 and you can get 10. And so there's like a greater ladder of kind of effort. The Gitcoin DAO is trying this interesting quadratic voting thing where your voting power is, I think, proportional to the square root of your token counts, which could be an interesting 50-50 compromise between coin quantity, but also being more egalitarian. What other things are there? There's obviously the whole kind of like apology thing of like basically proof of passing through education and getting some kind of proof that you're knowledgeable about some topic. There's a collection of ideas. Like I think the optimal mix is or the result is just going to end up mixing a lot of them. Like we don't really know what that looks like yet, and we need to just keep trying more.
So yesterday during your talk, you talked about DeFi, and I guess I don't know if lament is the right word, but you cautioned perhaps that the DeFi space was turning into something that is far too speculative and of financial nature, and that it seems that you're hopeful that DeFi sort of Ethereum comes back to its original vision of building useful and like utilitarian products, and like you said, the price of Ethereum should be a consequence of utility. Do you think that like Ethereum has gone too far into the financial side of things, and that there isn't enough utility in the applications that are being built on the platform?
I guess I mentioned in my presentation, I do think that the early kind of dominance of finance is a bit inevitable. I think like the two reasons that I mentioned, right? One is that centralized finance is crap to a greater extent than centralized non-finance is crap, right? Like say what you want about like email and how, like if I send a centralized email to someone in Guatemala, they are going to receive it in 1 second. Now, maybe the NSA is also going to receive it in 1 second, but like at least the recipient in Guatemala is going to receive it in 1 second. But if like international bank wires do not work like this, right? And so the level of quality that you need basically, it's much easier to be not only better than CeFi, but better than CeFi by enough to actually get people to switch over en masse. But in the case of non-financial things, like that barrier is smaller, right? So that's fact one. And then fact two is that finance is just more willing to pay high fees inherently because of what it is. Right? Like you're willing to pay a $12.42 transaction fee to do some like fancy $5,000 Insta-Flash Aave thing, but like you're not going to be willing to make that much to follow someone on decentralized Twitter. And this has been my consistent opinion for probably the last 5 years. Like I think once we have solved scaling and fees can go back down, we at least have a fair chance at getting the non-financial stuff to take off. We'll see, right? Because like this year, what's interesting is that we actually have the scaling solutions, right? Like there's Optimism, there's Arbitrum, there's ZK Sync, Loopring, Starknet.
But do you think these like roll-up solutions are, so obviously, as you know, I work on Cosmos, and so one of the worries I see is that you have these like great roll-up platforms, but they're at the end of the day, there's still these generalized chains, and I see that DeFi is just going to start dominating these chains as well. And so one of the interesting things we see in Cosmos right now is a lot of the chains are actually non-DeFi things. I think most of them are actually non-DeFi. So we have like Akash Network, which is a decentralized cloud. We have like Sentinel, which is a decentralized VPN. And so I see a lot of these like Web3 and Stargaze, which is this like social network. Do you think like how important do you think like application specific chains or roll-ups are going to be to sort of giving these non-DeFi applications a,
I'm bearish on that. The reason why I'm bearish on that is that I think the most interesting future applications are not going to be DeFi or non-DeFi. I think they're going to be a combination of like Fi and non-DeFi. Right. And I think being able to benefit from even like tightly coupled composability between like Fi things and non-Fi things is going to be valuable. I think in terms of solving scalability problems, like I personally just think that like they're obviously any chain, if the fees are low, there's going to be certain kind of like use cases that just kind of like flow in there because they have to flow somewhere, right? Like if gas fees ever go down to like 10 Wei, then I'm just gonna like use the chain to store an encrypted backup of my hard drive. So like there's always going to be this kind of like user kind of cosmic microwave background radiation, and as long as the total level of scalability is high enough that the intersection of the supply with that cosmic microwave demand curve is like at a point that's low enough, then whatever people want to do is going to be affordable. And like the nice thing about non-DeFi, I think, is that non-DeFi depends on synchronous composability less than DeFi does, and like it's still useful, but it depends on especially even depends on synchrony less, right? Like you don't need 5 apps to talk to each other in one like atomic transaction, and so like non-DeFi things, I think will be able to bounce between shards or like bounce between rollups more easily. So I'm confident that in the more mature ecosystem, at least I think they're not going to be screwed over by fees.
How much of like to the degen side of DeFi do you think is a consequence of I'd say like general, more broad macroeconomic trends of decreasing scarcity in the traditional finance system with like just like massive monetary inflation, but on the crypto side also just the ability to just create new assets. And I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of financial nihilism, but to me, like I feel that the incentive to just like create new assets and like create new forms of value is so high that there's a little incentive to say create something that isn't like in a financial in nature, like for founders, but also for like communities that are following those things because they're like sort of naturally going to go to the thing that could potentially make them money. Like I tend to agree with Sunny on this, and I wonder like if you've given any thought to this sort of broader macro trend.
Like, well, that trend, like there's a few different aspects to that, right? Like one is this kind of, I guess, ideological and philosophical thing of like, hey, the like mainstream civilization is like basically bullshit, and so like for if we're gonna make a couple of like fire podsies and like send around like links to the ENS to them, then like that's not doing anything worse than the game. That's just playing the game that already exists. So like it's definitely a mindset that I think motivates at least us. Some people in the space. So that's something that exists. There's also the this question of like, well, if you want to build something meaningful, then like to what extent is this possibility hanging there of like building some DeFi thing and potentially getting more money more easily? Like to what extent is that that taking away from from your motivation to do that? I mean, I think my answer is short term, it definitely can. Long term, it won't. And I think part of the reason is like there's a common meme that the crypto space is more productive in bear markets, and like I think it's true in my observation. It's true, and it's definitely true that in the short periods of time during which like there are these big bull cycles and everyone's just making $10,000 a day from just like sitting back on their chairs, like there's less motivation to do anything, but at the same time, like those phases are illusory, right? And you might think that you're earning $10,000 a day and that's a replacement for your job, but then when the bear cycle comes, you lose it all again, and then you're going to be sad you weren't actually doing anything substantive. So eventually, these things do like burn out, right? Like eventually, like if making some crazy financial contraption actually is more profitable than doing other things, then at some point enough people are going to do it, and people are going to start doing it really formulaically until like that stops being true. So I'm, I guess, optimistic in the medium and long term, though at the same time, like I do think that it's not a given. Like I think that it's also important to kind of explicitly talk about, support, and spread the ideas and culture of building things that are not just financial. Like both to like let people who have those ideas know that there are other people who also feel that way. Kind of give them some kind of framework to start with, and just like point out to people in general that like this is a community where you can come and do those kinds of things. Like I think communities that don't do that, right, they're gonna end up just like degrading into being like financial whatevers, right? Like like Binance Smart Chain, it's not going to be the like a locus of like super meaningful like revamp social media to improve humanity type of projects.
Do you think that this like degenification of everything? So you mentioned the talk yesterday about like, is the price the product? And that's not, we don't want that. But it seems like, I think what we saw with like the Wall Street bets stuff that happened earlier this year, where it's like this whole the price is the product idea is spreading even, you have like meme coins, like for Dogecoin, maybe the price is the product. But like for stocks, there's supposed to be something that's more utility driven, but like, well, now GME is the price is the product.
Yeah.
And do you think is there something in our culture that's like leading us this way, or did we just like pull the rug back, pull up the covers, and it turns out this has always been the case, and it's just more transparent now?
Again, I guess gambling has been like a human cultural universal for thousands of years, right?
But how do we the over gamblification of all things? Like let's say there's a lot of really useful DeFi products that are like have like utility, and but I feel for a lot of them, the price is slowly starting to become the product rather than the actual product itself.
Do you think that's a long-term property of the space, or do you think that's a property of the bull market? Because we have been into 2 years of a bull market now.
Right.
So I guess we'll see how people think in 2022. If you remember, even going back to how you thought in 2019 and how you thought in 2017, for example, like I would bet that your perspective right now is probably more similar to your perspective in 2017 to your perspective in 2019.
Right.
Right. Because in 2019, like nobody had the ability to say the price is the product,
right.
except DAI.
So I remember a little while ago you tweeted, I don't remember how long ago, but it was like you said like DeFi and like Bitcoin-esque stuff is solving the problems of the world in 2008, but those aren't necessarily the biggest problems of the world today. What would you say are the biggest problems of the world today that we should be thinking about?
I mean, I actually, I talked yesterday once again about this concept of just coming up with ways to improve social media, right? Like I think that's a big like cultural and mechanism design and like very interdisciplinary problem, and it's an important problem. And like it's an important problem for lots of different communities for lots of different reasons, right? Like we're getting all the problems at once, right? Like you get the like the censorship and the arbitrary deplatforming that happens in a just extremely closed and non-transparent way. There's the just very poor quality. Like I can't have conversations on Twitter anymore. It's so sad. Buy some Shiba. Buy some Harmony $1. Harmony $1 is the best cryptocurrency. Look at it. And then there's just the ways in which like engagement is misaligned with like any longer term goals that pretty much like any reasonable person has. So like these are all important problems, and like I talked about why I think crypto has some unique and interesting tools for solving that problem, and I think like we could be doing more to try, right?
Do you think that the explosion of NFTs and like all the standards around NFTs, and combined with that, layer twos being more like being ready and like being more available, do you think that the combination of these two technologies can make it such that now, because there's been so many attempts of doing decentralized social networks, and you said that like BitClout and all these things were not graveyards, but I mean like relatively speaking, they're graveyards compared to like the Facebooks and stuff. But do you think that these technologies and sort of like their convergence and can be the catalyst for decentralized social networks to finally emerge and like have sufficient like network effects?
Right. I think a really underrated aspect of the crypto space is just how it's like in the wake of just being a financial, like a degen, ape, eco, whatever system, it's also creating network effects that could be piggybacked on for very meaningful purposes, right? Like one example of this that's, I think, a little different from what you were saying is like how just giving everyone public keys and creating a registry of public keys has been a dream of the cypherpunks since the 1990s, right? Like everyone wanted to have just like a society where just everyone has a key and you can just like go and send an encrypted message to someone, and it doesn't require any kind of extra setup, right? But those PGP webs of trust and never will end up taking off. But now, we have everyone's got an Ethereum wallet, or at least everyone within the community has an Ethereum wallet. So it's not the world, but it is a subset of the world that talks to each other. And everyone they've got either a MetaMask wallet or a status wallet or some other kind of Ethereum wallet, or it could also even be a hardware wallet. So on top of the just having keys, there's even this powerful ecosystem of coming up with better ways of storing your keys. And you can use those keys for signing, and potentially you could also use those keys for encryption. I think like ethmail.cc was like trying to do an encryption. I mean, I think that's something that should be standardized much more potentially, and like turn into some kind of standard. So then once you have an account, you can use that account to log into things. And so and then at this also, what we have is you have just a community of people who have common values and interests, right, and who talk to each other. And that's also an excellent bootstrapping ground for any kind of system, right? Like new projects that depend on network effects can take off. Like they just need to have seed communities to take off in, right? Like Facebook started with, I think it was Harvard college students, right? Mm-hmm. So like why can't the next generation of like actually good social media take off starting from the crypto community?
Do you think it's possible to, or do you think it would be beneficial to bootstrap off of the existing identity systems? So for context, 2 years ago at ETH Waterloo, I created something called Sheetcoin, which was a way of like moving ETH onto a Google Sheet and blah blah blah. But I actually met someone at the at ETHCC yesterday, and he was really excited about Sheetcoin because one of the things that we did was we actually made it so you can send to an email address, and then we actually like sort of hacked Google OAuth to allow us to verify RSA on like Ethereum, and we got Google to sign. But the coolest part is I could send to people's email addresses. Everyone already has an email address. Not everyone has a private key yet. And then you use that as an onboarding flow into when they want to come onto main chain, then they can create a private key then.
I mean, that sounds both enticing and scary. Enticing because like I actually want to like directly compete with Google and the Twitter on the identity side and not entrench them, but and also enticing because like that definitely is a very fast onboarding process that like it does for a lot of users have higher security than a wallet they might lose the keys for.
You could have an influencer who wants to airdrop an NFT to all their followers. You can just snapshot their
totally right. I mean, I think Polymarket also like they were using magic links, right? So we're basically doing a very similar thing. So that's that's definitely interesting. I'm also bullish on social recovery. Like I think because social recovery, in my opinion, is like a very noob-friendly way of storing, like just having accounts, because like even people who are very non-technical, like they can understand the concept of like here I'm selecting 10 people and I trust at least 5 of them, right? So that's something like if we just come up. So I think that's good for onboarding, but at the same time, like I do also want to kind of onboard people like not just onto an application, but actually properly on those kind of accounts that gives that's within the crypto ecosystem.
When it comes to social media, there's one view of crypto, which is that like it's about making scarcity more legible. And so have you heard of like the Friends with Benefits community and that token?
Well, I mean, the concept of friends and benefits is that like what you have like a sexual relationship, and then you're also
there's a token that was...
wait. They just like took this category of human activity and they made a token of it.
No. So it's by Trevor McVedries. He created this. He has a company called Brud. He came really a lot from the NFT space, but they basically created this community which is like token gated, and you everyone who's in the community has an opportunity to invite. The Friends with Benefits name is just a little bit of a meme. What do you think? Do you think that what are the? I guess maybe another way is like what are the applications of blockchains that can help social media? Like we talked a lot about cryptography. Everyone having a private key. That's great, but is there anything about this blockchain thing, about scarcity or anything that can help?
So I think like two or three possible directions. One of them is accounts, and just the concept that like you could basically have an account that is multi-platform. And the interesting thing about ENS names, right, is that they're an account that is multi-platform, and they're a name that is multi-platform that people are willing to use as a name, right? Like the only other like really widely adopted multi-platform accounts would be like email addresses, but like nobody wants to use your email address as your name, right? Like I think it's because of like names are self-expression, and like you're okay with what's your ENS name?
sunnya97.eth.
Yeah, sunnya97.eth, right? Like that's
the handle I use.
Yeah, like that's like a it's something that you'd be happy to use as like one of your names, but like having something at gmail.com as your name, like it feels like like
awkward.
Yeah, like why would I want to be like basically wearing a Gmail pride sticker as part of my name?
But so Balaji has the other take, right, where he's like he's been pushing recently that everyone should have their own personal domain, and like so your email address is I'm not going to say it, but but it is more personal. It's not at gmail.com.
Right.
So what do you think about that view?
I mean, that's also possible, but like in practice so far, like there aren't really easy to use tools for that, and there isn't really a good incentive to make easier to use tools for that. Because like centralized people, they don't want to build tools, they want to build empires, right? And Web3 space is all about fewer empires and more tools. But there isn't a natural incentive to build a tool. The natural incentive is to build an empire so you can capture the network effect. So like there's the incentives to like actually build the tools to make it easier to work with having your own domain name like don't seem like they're there. Whereas with a crypto-based name, they are there, but to some extent, right? Because you have the crypto tokens and foundations and like grants and projects and all of these entities. But I guess this was a digression, right? Because like the names are only one aspect of where I think crypto is interesting, right? So identifiers that are like accounts that are also that also have nice names is one. Another is a lot of people thinking about improving social media are interested in this concept of a kind of content view separation, right? So there's like the content layer where anyone can just publish whatever content they want, and like maybe you can bundle in a bit of anti-spam, and like either it's on chain or it's on some Whisper-like network where if you have an identity you can send maximum n things every day. And then the views are interfaces that look at that information and show you some of it in some order. And if you want to have content view separation, which is really powerful because instead of different platforms totally being separate from each other, different views can still share most of the same network effects. But the content has to be on some credibly neutral ground. And like decentralized cryptographic networks are an excellent kind of cryptographically neutral ground. So that's number two. And then number three is incentives, right? Like I don't know exactly what is the correct way to incorporate incentives and crypto social media. I know that there's definitely like a lot of very wrong ways to do that, but I mean, I'm sure there's some like potentially correct and very powerful ways too. But if you want to do that, then like the blockchains have their own financial layer built in, which is which makes them once again like I think a really powerful ground for doing this sort of stuff. So those are the three areas where I see it, like why I see the crypto space as sort of naturally fit to do something.
So during your talk, you also discussed retroactive public good funding, which is a concept that was new to me, and I thought it was really interesting. So, what is retroactive public good funding, and why do you think it's interesting?
Sure. So the concept of retroactive public goods funding is basically that you would have some mechanism that decides like what projects are important and like what projects are good, and and what projects deserve funding because they provide like value just to a community, and it funds them. But the difference from a grants program is that a grants program is proactive, right? It's like it gives you $100,000 because you wrote up a plan for how you believe that you can use this $100,000 to do good things, and like here's some reasons why it's credible. But here it's giving grants after the fact to projects that have already shown some value. And this is coupled with basically like a prediction market through an investment ecosystem, right? So like one of the ways of doing this, obviously you could just as a solo developer develop something, like spend your own time, work for free, and then if you create something that's really valuable, then like after 2 years you get a big retroactive grant and it was all worth it. But what you could also do is you could you issue what I call project tokens, right? So you just create a project token for a project, and you could set up some allocation mechanism. Anyone who contributes to that project gets some project tokens. You could even sell some project tokens on Uniswap, and then the project tokens become tradable. And
when you think about it, ETH was that, right? Like ETH was a project token for this world computer.
Definitely. And the idea would be that like this retroactive grant mechanism would then basically just buy up these project tokens after the fact, right? And so not only do the founders of the project benefit, but also anyone who bought into the project token, and so gave the founders like funding in like fiat or ETH or like whatever normal currencies to actually like do the work ahead of time. They would also get rewarded for that, right? So I think the core principle behind retroactive public goods funding is that like institutions in general, like I think they're either centralized or they're decentralized. If an institution is centralized, then it ends up excluding a lot of important perspectives. And if an institution is decentralized, it's conformist, right? And those are both problems. And so, but in both cases, it's easier for something conformist to be right about retrospective questions, to be right about what already was important, than it is for something conformist to be right about prospective questions, right? And
if we look back on the last 50 years, we can say like, certain vaccines were
certain vaccines were very important for humanity.
But had we thought about that 50 years ago, perhaps it would not have been it. So.
Right, exactly. Like I think. Like take life extension research, for example, right? Like this is sort of one of my pet entrepreneurial public goods that I think is really important. Like there's like someone like Aubrey de Grey, like he has just been working really hard on just making life extension research happen ever since the early 2000s. Pretty much nobody believed him, and like there just isn't an institutional structure by which people who believe in these kinds of things ahead of everyone else get any kind of reward for it. And so. Just like if that kind of structure existed, then Aubrey could have gotten quite a bit more kind of like economic firepower behind him much more quickly.
Would that also work for private investment? Do you think that there could be like retroactive VC investment or this?
Well, I mean, I think like VC investment already is retroactive investment, right? Because like the VC investment itself is proactive. The thing that's retroactive is the exit, right? So like a lot of the VC ecosystem is already implicitly a retroactive grants program because there is an entire set of startups whose exit strategy is entirely designed on the possibility that they'll just get bought up by Facebook and Google. Like this literally exists, right? And there's plenty of startups that just pitch to VCs that this is a possible exit for us.
So
so like basically, I think just to a large extent, this already exists in the startup space. So they're just trying, like retroactive public goods funding is about taking that same principle and like basically making an equivalent version of that, but where the metric people are optimizing for, instead of just being like profit generation or satisfying the desires of the Zuck or the Sergey, it is something that tries to approximate a community's values and the public good more.
So do you think DAOs are good at doing this? Because one of my worries right now is that DAOs are a little bit too short-term thinking. So an example I'm thinking about is on Uniswap, there was a proposal to do a $30 million grant to get development. And a lot of people were like up in arms, like, oh my God, this is so much money. It's like, no, don't you understand that this is actually a retroactive grant for like all the work that the Geth team has done for the last 4 years? But so do you think that DAOs, this like decentralized collectives will ever be as on being able to play long-term games as like, for example, maybe more centralized institutions can?
And DAOs are definitely conformist, at least in their current form, right? I mean, it's hard to say things about DAOs as a category because DAOs are a much broader category than like DAOs as they exist today are. But DAOs are definitely conformist, and so a DAO whose governance is like constrained to give retroactive grants, like is something that could potentially be quite powerful, potentially more powerful than a DAO that's giving proactive grants, right? Because in order to succeed, you have to make some risky bets about the future, and a conformist system is just not going to do that.
Can you describe a little bit what conformist versus non-conformist means?
Basically making only taking actions on the basis of viewpoints for which there is already consensus.
One of the things you mentioned in your talk was about how we have to make sure crypto continues to align with our values. As the community grows, how do we think the values shift as well? So one of the things is NFTs, right? I don't like calling things NFT movement because I think NFT is like a technical term. Let's call it the digital art movement.
Sure.
That has brought definitely a big cultural shift, right? We've brought it, and I think it has some good aspects. I think that Friends with Benefits community is something that really I think only would have come out of the kind of person who came from the digital art world. But at the same time, it brings those crypto influencers who are shilling Ethereum Max, and how do we So how do you
Well, was the Ethereum Max thing even connected to NFTs? I thought that was just a garden variety shitcoin.
But it's not connected to NFTs, but the people it targeted, like the Kim Kardashians, these are people who came into crypto via this digital art movement. And so how do you think the culture and values have to evolve or try to, or how do you think it goes forward as the scope of crypto?
I don't think the NFT space was net bad even as far as scamminess goes, because there's definitely specific examples of scammy people and projects that either are NFTs or were inspired by the NFT space. But before NFTs existed, there were a lot of that, right?
Yeah. No one said there weren't scams before.
Right, the other person who came to Bitcoin Miami with an Ethereum Max T-shirt, which is I don't know, such a Chad move in a very dark way, because he just totally discredited himself in front of both the Bitcoin and Ethereum communities in one move. But he even I believe even in 2018, right? He I think was sued by the SEC, I believe, for shilling some other very scammy project, ICO project, right? So he was definitely not brought into the space by NFTs. This was just he seems like a honestly not very joyful fellow who also has multiple domestic violence convictions, who also is interested in shilling stuff, but. So those kinds of people exist, and anything that has money is going to attract those kinds of people. But the thing that NFTs brought that I like is just it did bring cultural balance, because it brought this kind of community that cares about artistic things and that is less kind of purely money oriented. And if Ethereum was just the NFT community, it would have very weird excesses of its own. But it's a good complement, and it's a good balance to what was there before the NFT community, which is the DeFi community, and then the DeFi community itself was in improvements to what was there before, which is the ICO community, right? So whatever the flaws of the new thing, you do have to, I think, also think about it as remember the often even crazier older things that came before. And to me, it actually does feel the craziness is slowly decreasing and the interestingness is increasing. And especially if after NFTs we start talking about crypto social, there are going to be crypto social things that we at Epicenter 2023 are going to can just laugh at and consider to be totally crazy, but
for these logos back here.
No. I mean, I don't know. Status is fine, but it's the thing. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of actually genuine and very interesting crypto social stuff happening too. So I think the other thing, right, is that Ethereum, as it's growing, it's early on in Ethereum's history, you could call Ethereum a community, but now I think Ethereum, it's not a community, it's an ecosystem, right? And ecosystems, there's definitely a lower level of cohesion that you can expect from an ecosystem, but that's okay. That's the price of growth and the price of getting past a higher power of Dunbar's number, right? But at the same time, in an ecosystem, there are sub-communities, and as long as there are like meaningful sub communities that are doing things that like we find important, then like the good work continues to be done.
So I guess one last thing what I want to talk about is, I know you like Tyler Cohen's podcast. So there is another well-known figure who has also been sued by the SEC that has also been very active in crypto recently. Yeah. So overrated, underrated, Elon Musk. What do you think his game here? Like, what do you think? Is he just trolling, or do you think there's like something, a larger thing that he's pushing for?
I think people overstate the extent to which he is he has some really deep scheming and thought behind the way that he is approaching crypto. Like, I think he's just like a fun computer geek who likes dogs. Okay. and like he's clearly attracted to some of the ideals and values behind crypto, and that's that it's just something that he's excited on, and he is acting on that excitement, and I think that's a totally healthy thing to be doing. But at the same time, obviously, there's definitely been big mistakes in the way that he's handled it. And like, oh, I love Bitcoin, and oh, actually, wait, there's all these environmental issues, and then oh, Doge, and oh, so, and then like also like. I don't have the highest view, for example, of like the way that he's just kind of like walked into the Dogecoin community and like he's just basically acting like he can be an important figure inside of it. Like, I don't know, like my own personal style is that I think like if I wanted to join a community and become important in it, I would do some significant good thing for the community first and then chill second.
I would like to see him do some development. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Like even if all that he does is like donates, $15 million to a Doge dev fund, like that would be amazing, right? So Elon, if you're listening to this, like if you just donate $15 million to a Doge dev fund, then I'm sure Doge people, including myself, I'm a Doge person, will definitely have a lot of respect for you for that.
So I got you a gift, which is a pair of Shiba pajamas.
Oh, amazing!
Hopefully you can't dump these ones. But yeah, so
okay,
yeah, I think it's it's funny. I actually. Before I started my current project, Osmosis, I was thinking about building how to get Dogecoin onto proof of stake. And I started like kind of implementing it, and I spent like a week really looking into it. And I came away with the conclusion that no one's interested in Dogecoin anymore, not worth my time. Well, maybe I was a bit wrong about that one, but...
So let's wrap it up here. But before we do, we talked about the space growing and everything, and you talked about in your talk about like aligning values and aligning what's useful. How do we ensure that we sort of like stick to the initial values and the sort of initial principles, and like how does that not get diluted with like an influx? I mean, you may have noticed like there's a lot of OGs here, but there's like a lot of new people too, which is great because it brings in like all this sort of like new energy, but it can also dilute some of the values and some of the things that we, as like the, initial community building Ethereum think are useful. What's your advice to say to the community to like stay true to like your initial vision and sort of like the initial vision for Ethereum?
I think like either come up with an idea and actually like build some interesting project, or like look at the things that already exist and participate in them. I mean, one very concrete example is Status, right? Like it's a decentralized messenger. It's like, well, it's right there. It's one of the sponsors. Yay! Everyone bow down to the sponsor. Status. Status.im. So the it's a decentralized messenger. Like it uses like Waku, which is basically like the fork of Whisper under the hood. It's got a built-in crypto wallet. Like it's also not a ghost town. There's actually a lot of discussion and activity happening inside of it. The quality is like it's not perfect, but it's like slowly improving, and I think it's usable as a messenger at this point. So like you can just like.
Can I move my family chat to Status? Do you think?
I actually literally think that it's that like it is ready for that now.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So like actually go. Yes.
Signal was hard enough.
Yeah, no. Go around and actually like look into all of these things and like try actually using them.
Great. And one thing that's been on my mind since this morning was what's this whole Mina Kunis, Ashton Kutcher, like how did this come together? Like what is going on here?
I don't know. Like a friend introduced me to Ashton, and like he's actually been interested in crypto for some time. I think I even might have like met him a few years ago at some point. So he is, also interested in crypto things, and I mean he and Mila are also interested in NFTs, and they're just interested in kind of like finding their way around the space and making something meaningful out of it. I think that's great.
Yeah, that would be terrific. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah,
Alec. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll see you again next year if this event happens again.
Thank you for the interrogation. It's been great.